Kelsey Feighner has owned hermit crabs for 5 years, rescuing her first 3 in 2015. Things snowballed quickly from there, and she got to attempt raising Zoe in 2019, getting 1 to land, but not through the first molt. She's hoping to have another chance sometime soon. Kelsey has been avid about animal care since she was young, becoming even more so when she got her first hedgehog in 2018. She has a BS in fisheries and wildlife and a background in wildlife rehabilitation. For her day job, she works at the University of Kansas Medical Center caring for research rodents. At home, she currently has 16 hermit crabs, in addition to a house full of other animals: 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 hedgehogs, 6 rats, a ball python, a lesser tenrec, and a dwarf hamster. Finding new ways to enrich her animals' lives is a favorite passion of hers, and she's thrilled to be able to talk about enrichment for hermit crabs for CrabCon 2020. And we are thrilled to have her. Please welcome Kelsey Feighner.
Hello everyone, my name is Kelsey, and today I'm going to talk about adding toppers to your hermit crab tanks. As a lot of us find out firsthand, hermit crabs often really like to climb once they're healthy and have settled in. We know they need deep substrate so they can molt safely, but it's just as important to provide enough space for them to move above ground and things to do for enrichment. Many of us have seen our own crabs or others climbing on the most unlikely things. Spider crabs climbing upside down are not uncommon. Anything in the tank can be considered fair game by the little daredevils. This is always entertaining to watch, but this also shows how important climbing is as a behavior for hermit crabs. So toppers are great for adding a lot more space for them to climb and explore. I started my crab journey with a 40-gallon tank and 3 crabs, but we know how the story goes. A few upgrades later, I ended up with the 125-gallon tank, and at the beginning of 2020, I decided to upgrade one more time and got 2 large Exoterra terrariums to add to my tank. However, you don't have to wait 5 years, but it's still a good idea before you jump into it to have the basics of crab care mastered. Even if you have other animal experience, hermit crabs are still a bit unique due to their molting behavior and their environmental needs. So you want to have some practice at balancing heat and humidity and maintaining a safe substrate first. When planning to add toppers, it's also important to have a temporary setup for your crabs. Things can go wrong and take longer than planned, so you won't have to stress if they're in good conditions in the tote for a little bit. This also lets you take your time, plan out what you want, and not regret doing this or that or adding something. And trust me, I did that. The 2 usual ways you can add a topper to your tank are with an aquarium or with terrariums. Aquariums are usually more accessible. A lot of people may have started out with a smaller tank and want a use for it after upgrading their crabs. You can also get 10 or 20-gallon tanks cheap during $1-gallon sales at pet stores, or you can find them used on resale sites like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. So that part's really nice. But they're also less accessible as a topper and may require more modification if you want to open them up. Terrariums are sold as reptile and amphibian enclosures, and they're really nice because they usually have front opening doors, which is why I went with those. But they're not as easily found used in most places, and they're more expensive to get even with sales. I also wanted to touch on another option that I haven't seen used yet, which is PVC Vivariums. They're much more common in reptile keeping, and I have one for my ball python. But there are a number of businesses that make and sell them, and some do special orders, so you could get one without a bottom. It's fairly easy to modify these, since you can drill holes to attach things, or to allow cords or tubing out, and to attach lights or heating. They're also a lot lighter than glass tanks of a similar size, and they're much less fragile, which are some pretty big pluses. The biggest drawback for them is they're also expensive, and they're not clear all the way around. They're only clear at the doors, so you might have a little harder time finding your hermit crabs. But there would still be an interesting option to explore, and these are a couple of the businesses that I know of or have worked with. I got my ball pythons Viv from Animal Plastics. So back to aquariums. The simplest method for using them is just to turn them upside down and have them cover only part of your base tank. It's not the easiest to work with for decorating, and it can be difficult to remove or maintain. I've also heard of people removing the tank bottoms so that it's open all the way through. But you need to be careful if you try this, because the glass can be kind of difficult to remove. And for either method, you can get custom glass or plexiglass to cover the rest of the base tank and the topper if you do decide to remove the bottom. So I have a couple of really nice examples of aquarium toppers that people have decided to let me use. So here's the first one by Jen Bouton. I hope you said that right. She has a 20-gallon and a 10-gallon stacked on top of a 55-gallon base tank. It looks awesome and gives them a lot of climbing room. I really like all of the mats and stuff to help them climb. The next one is from Amanda Mitchell, who has a 75-gallon base tank with a 20-gallon tall topper. The hammocks are really nice for climbing, and there's a shell shop at the front, which is really great for saving space on the sand. It's a good idea. So then moving on to terrariums, they're pretty easy, in my opinion. The Exoterra ones come with the screen top, and that's removable. So you would take that off, turn it upside down, put it on, and you're all set. A few more things, but still. You do have to be careful with them, as the glass is usually thinner, so they are more fragile. The glass doors are fragile too, so you want to make sure that they're locked in place before you move the tank around. If you can't find one that's the same size as the base tank, you may still need to look at custom top options for the open section, or if you have enough space to work with in the topper, you could also just seal it shut and go in from the topper. I have a few examples of these. They're a little more popular, I think, due to the doors. The first one is from Kate Moffat, who has a 125-gallon base tank with the 50-gallon Exoterra. There's a bunch of ways to get up and climb, which is really nice, and I know my hermit crabs love those coconut hides. Those are perfect for adding hides to a topper if you want. The next is our wonderful mother of crabs, Mary Akers. She has a Exoterra on her 90-gallon tank, and I love the woven hide. And just as a general note, you do have to be careful with adding the grass or the seagrass mats and nets and huts and stuff to tanks, because they can be really prone to molding, but that can work a lot better in a topper because you have them further away from the pools and from the substrate, which are both wet and can cause more issues with that. And last we have Serena Huffman's tank, which is a 25-gallon Exoterra on a 75-gallon base tank. I love all of the extra greenery in the top. She commented that she tried to make it a little bit foresty, which is perfect and gives the crabs lots of spaces to hide, so I'm sure they love that too. And then finally, I wanted to mention that you can also use a topper to connect multiple base tanks. This can be a lot easier to manage in terms of moving tanks, as the big ones get very heavy. My 125-gallon is about 300 pounds empty, so it adds up very quickly. You can really get a custom setup with the space that you're working with by doing this, but it can also be a little more complicated. You have to make sure that you have the environment balanced through all of the tanks, otherwise there's more of a risk of flooding from condensation. And you also have to be really careful about how much weight you're putting in one room on the floor if you do not have the tank set up on a ground floor. So you definitely want to check on that. Anna Keel and Ian Green have a setup like this. They have 3 55-gallon tanks as the base, connected by one 55-gallon and a 29-gallon topper. Anna mentioned that when they set up the first topper, they did have a flood literally overnight due to heavy condensation forming. But when adding the second one, the base tanks were stable beforehand, so no further issues. So that's definitely something to think about. They also did some extra customizing with heat and humidity controls, so that's something else you can research if you're interested. Ian did a presentation on DIY controls last year, so if you missed it, that would be a great thing to check out. And although I'm sure plenty of you have already seen it if you watch Crab Central Station, Darcy and her daughters have a wonderful setup with lots of tanks that are connected, and it really is a good example of how you can set up an entire crab room if you want to and have the space. If you haven't had a chance to see it, there's a video on their YouTube channel that shows the whole setup and gives some more details, so definitely check that out if you have not yet. So, let's get into more of the details, starting with attachment. There are probably other options, but the two I see mentioned most often are either heavy-duty Velcro or Gorilla Tape, or using both of those together. I used Velcro for my tank, so you can see the strips on the base tank here. Then the other strips go on the bottom of the topper, and then you lower that on. So the Velcro plus the weight of the toppers has made mine pretty much rock solid, and it takes some effort from me and one of my partners to pull them back off, so we have to be careful with it. Then, as I mentioned before, there are a number of complications that can happen with toppers, so you're going to want to be prepared to do some problem solving, just in case. It can be more challenging to balance heat and humidity once you expand the space that you're trying to control. And as with crab tanks in general, you want to be really careful moving things around because it's really easy to drop or bang the tanks on something and have them break, and that sucks a lot. So make sure you have help. And be careful if you're cutting glass, of course. And again, as mentioned, it is often more difficult to access the tank in general, either for changing food, maintaining pools, and that kind of thing. And it's an added complication if you do have a problem with your substrate. I managed to hurt myself last year trying to take care of flooded substrate without taking the toppers off by leaning through the doors. Not my best idea. So you want to make sure you plan for that. For temperature and humidity, one of the biggest concerns with this is the risk of condensation and raining, which floods the substrate. This is a big reason it's a good idea to have your crabs in a temporary tote beforehand so that you can make sure the setup is stable before you have crabs digging down in it. You have a larger area of heat, and while it's fine to have a temperature range, it does increase the chance of condensation in the cooler areas. So it's okay to have temperature range, but just make sure that everything is warm enough to stay balanced. And as for humidity, you do have more chance of cracks leaking your humidity, and you may have low humidity for a while after setting up because the new decor is going to absorb moisture. So that's another reason to kind of let the tank stabilize before you put your crabs in. Alright, so next up we have troubleshooting heat issues. With the Exoterras, especially the thinner glass, it does help a lot to insulate them by adding backgrounds. You may still need to add more heat mats for your topper depending on your room temperature, but I had good luck with just adding lots of backgrounds to both of them. It really helped contain the heat, so that will make a big difference. If you do have to add more heat mats, make sure that you double check how much voltage your thermostats and your power outlets can manage. Heat mats are generally pretty low power, but it's a good idea to check just in case. Overloading any of your electrical equipment can increase the risk of a fire. So I do have a space heater that I keep on low next to my tank, which helps keep the front from getting a bunch of condensation on it. So that's another option that you can try. And also keep in mind that if you do add more lighting to your tank, that may affect your temperature as well, depending on what you use. Most LED lights don't give off a lot of heat, but some other kinds can. So while condensation can be a big risk with uneven heating, it's still more likely to have issues with low humidity for adding a topper than with high humidity. You do want to make sure that you check for cracks where the base tank and the topper meet, which is why a lot of people will use the tape to connect the two as well. The Exoterras also have plastic vents at the front, which those can be taped up or left high to help control humidity as well. Or left open, sorry. Weather stripping is also really helpful for creating a tighter seal, and it's pretty cheap. Tried to show where I have some on my base tank here. It's kind of hidden underneath the Velcro strip. The little bit there on the top as well was left from when I had a glass lid on and helped keeping that sealed, and I removed that when I put my toppers on. Another big thing that can help with maintaining humidity is to increase your pool size or add a filter or bubblers to the pools. This creates more exchange between air and water, so it gets more of the moisture into the air. And as an added benefit, you don't have to change your pools as frequently. You can go down to once a week instead of every other day or every couple days. I think most of the tank safety stuff is fairly common sense, but I wanted to just remind people anyway. I know I am definitely prone to forgetting stuff sometimes. Make sure you're careful when moving tanks again. Try to get help if you can. Both make sure you keep your back safe and don't hurt yourself. And it really sucks to break a tank, and it can happen so easily from just setting it down wrong or a little bit too hard. So make sure, and also make sure that you always empty your tank before moving it. If you don't have the bottoms fully and evenly supported, any weight in the tank can crack or shatter the glass very easily. And if you're working with the Exoterra tank, make sure you have the doors supported if you have the tank sitting back on its back. I learned that one the hard way. I let a door swing open by accident, and it broke one of the pins holding the door in. I was able to fix it, but just as a heads up. A big piece of the planning ahead is to make sure you can still get to everything you need to. Trust me, it is a huge pain to set everything all up and then realize you can't get your pools out without dumping water everywhere, or you can't reach your food bowls easily. The harder you make maintenance, the more frustrated you'll get with your topper instead of being able to enjoy it. And of course, don't forget to try and keep one step ahead of the little bulldozers. And try to make sure you have cords covered, make sure they can't pull the bubbler out of the pool or block up the filter, and so on. They are very good at getting themselves into trouble sometimes. So, let's talk about the fun part, which is decorating. Yay! So, some other options for store-bought backgrounds include a crate light diffuser, which is getting a lot more popular, I've noticed, for making tank structures. And I've also seen a few people use it as a background so that they can attach other things to it. You can find it at home improvement stores, and it's sold on Amazon as well. And if you buy a new Exoterra, they come with a foam background, so you can either use just that or you can modify it. Crabs will totally tear it up, but it's not harmful. They usually won't eat it, so it just makes a little bit of a mess. I did modify one of the backgrounds that came with my Exoterras by painting silicone on and then adding dry coconut fiber. I also cut away sections of the foam and siliconed in cork rounds and pieces for climbing, and I highly recommend that. I always find at least one crab hanging out on the cork, so they really like that. There's almost always somebody where they have that little cartoon crab. It's a favorite spot. And then there's also the option of making your own foam background. And I've done that a couple of times, and it's definitely a learning experience. I got the styrofoam panels from home improvement stores in the insulation section. I cut ledges and then used toothpicks to put them in place. And then you can get great stuffed pond spray foam to add more detail and build more structures. I used the pond and stone one, but it's the one used most for aquariums. They have a couple different kinds. Then once you have your structures built and carved, you can add silicone and whatever substrate you want to cover it with. I used lava rock for my first one, which was quite bulky. And then when I made my new one this year, I used black aquarium sand, and I used some scattered lava rocks for climbing. I do think this one looks nicer, whether that's from experience or just not quite as much bulk from the stones, but it has not been as durable, and I already have a crab that has dug a hole in one shelf, because bulldozers. But yeah, if you do want to try making your own backgrounds, definitely Google for some guides to help you out. They're pretty commonly used for reptile and amphibian setups, so that should give you some more information. Make sure you do double and triple check all of your measurements so that everything fits right. And with the spray foam, go slowly and let it dry as you add layers. It expands a lot, so you probably will want to experiment a little bit at first. Like I said, it's a little bit of a learning curve. And also be careful with it because it's extremely sticky. We still have some stuck on the carpet in the basement from me. And also, please be smarter than me and work in a well-ventilated area when you add the silicone because the fumes are very strong. And a mask can help with that too, and I'm sure we all have plenty of those around still. So another option is using cholla branches to make a wall. Mike Vukoder was the first person I saw who did this, and I loved the idea, so I asked him if I could copy. He cut the branches in half and siliconed them right to the glass wall. I made mine by putting spray foam on a sheet of craft mesh and sticking the cholla pieces into it when it was about half dry. Then I used silicone to add more pieces on top to cover the foam. So you can see both mine and Mike's so that you have a couple different examples. And then there's lots of options for adding permanent support structures for your toppers. Like I said, you can use the egg crate to make shelves. You can also silicone in glass or plexiglass panels, corner shelves, or baskets. I got lucky here, and my base tank already had glass panels siliconed in the middle to help with support for the lids. So I just siliconed some coconut mats on top of them, and they make really nice partial floors for my toppers. One of my favorite things to use, and just one of my favorite tips that I always try to tell people, is using wall corner guards. These are something that have to be siliconed in, and they can't be added with crabs in, so I always kind of feel bad if people don't know about it and kind of wish they had done it before putting their crabs in the tank. They're fairly cheap on Amazon or from home improvement stores. You just drill holes in one side and then silicone the other side to the glass. Let them dry, and they are perfect for hanging all kinds of stuff. They are so much easier than command hooks and suction cups. They can come loose after a while, just if things get brittle from the heat and everything, but they don't come off nearly as easy as the other options I've found. You do need to let them cure for at least a couple of days, so like I said, make sure this is something that you plan on doing before you put your crabs back in. As you can see, I seriously had them all over my tank. I had them all around the top edge of my base tank, and then I also put them around the top edge of both my toppers, and added a strip on the ceiling, which you can see that second red box at the top. And I also added strips to the sides of my forest topper, kind of hiding in the coconut mat. And as you can see, my hermit crabs like them too. I can often find them climbing along them. They kind of use them as little, I don't know, cliff highways or something. They like to climb around down them to get around. And, of course, we add toppers so that crabs can climb. I made a really nice climber by using one of those flexible foam vines, and I wrapped it in sisal rope. The sisal rope makes it much easier for the crabs to climb, especially the bigger crabs, and I was able to mold the vine into a spiral shape to make a way for them to climb into the forest topper. I'm not using it anymore just because it made it a little difficult to get to the food dishes and stuff, but it worked really well, and we found crabs using it multiple times. Of course, there are plenty of other options too, like these rope and wood bridges, which I use a lot of, and I've seen other people use them quite a bit too. and there's handmade bridges from some of our lovely stores, so go check out the expo if you want to buy some of those. As we saw in one of our example tanks, there are store-bought hammocks that can be used, and you can also use crab-safe branches or trio branches from our sellers or from reptile supply sites. Those are really useful too. As we all know, crabs love to hide, and they're experts at it, so coconut hides are a very popular option, and I think at least most of us have at least one of. Cork rounds, like I said, are really well liked too, and mine just love to hide in them or sit on top of them. They can be a little bit harder to find sometimes, but they're getting more common on animal supply sites and at stores. You can also really find them at reptile expos or conventions if you go. And there's baskets and bowls that you can get. Shower baskets are really common, and they're really useful for making moss pits or leaf pits. Honestly, do not discount nooks and crannies. They are really an underrated option that crabs seem to like a lot. I often find a lot of mine just kind of wedging themselves between a couple of things and calling it good. So they really like where the Troya wall meets the fake rock wall for that. Just kind of wedge themselves in and go to sleep. And again, just one more reminder, make sure that the little bulldozers do not get into anything important. You can use aquarium air tubing to cover up the cords for lights or filters. I have a light strip inside the tank for a UVB light, which UVB light does not travel through glass, so a light does have to be inside the tank. I wanted to make sure that the plug area was inaccessible so that the crabs wouldn't get hurt or create a fire hazard. So I flattened out a piece of corner guard and used Velcro strips to block the area off, and that has worked really well. And while crabs do just fine surviving falls, make sure you do create some barriers if you have a topper above your pools. You don't want them to cannonball in and create a nice tidal wave or break a glass pool and cause a flood. So hopefully all of that helps you get started with what to plan for and some things to look for and think about when setting up a topper. There are tons of options for decorating and more than one way to set these up, so definitely look around on the groups and the forums and even check out reptile or amphibian websites for some more ideas, because there is just a lot of stuff out there. And they can be a lot of work, but it really is worth it when you see how much your crabs love the extra space. Mine use every bit of both of their toppers, and there's often someone right at the top at 2.5 feet up. And like, these guys climb trees in the wild, so it's not quite the same, but it definitely gives them just some more space to hang out. And of course, do not forget to share pictures if you set up a topper. We all love to admire everyone's beautiful tanks, and get more ideas. There's always somebody that comes up with some great idea that everyone else wants to copy then. So it really helps with making engaging enclosures for our pets. Thank you for joining my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.